The world loves chicken. However, much of the world does not know how to prepare and cook chicken. These are just the facts. Thus, the reasoning and aim for these next few videos is going to be to teach all about chicken starting from square one. Today, in part 1 of the Chicky series, we are going to, like I said earlier, break a whole bird down into 6 to 8 pieces, depending on how you want it done. I'm gonna show you how to make an 8-piece, but you can easily just leave it how it is and make a 6-piece. You'll see. I'm going to shut up and let's get to slicing. To begin, obviously, we are going to need one whole dang bird. Here I have a cleaned up chickie, which means the head, neck, guts, feet, and feathers have been removed. I've always felt very strongly that the back of a chicken looks sort of like an alien face. Prove me wrong. Anyways. As we move around the bird, we'll see all of its parts, like the legs, otherwise called drumsticks, the back and neck, the thighs, and the breast separated in half by this keel bone. Before we begin, we need to remove the wishbone. You can sort of think of this as like the chicken's collarbone, sort of. It's located right here. Removing this wishbone isn't always necessary, and to be frank, it's definitely sort of a pain in the ass, but it's definitely also an important principle to learn. Use a small knife to scrape away any flesh between you and the wishbone. From there, carefully finagle your fingers and or the knife under the bone until you can cut it loose enough to jiggle it out. The bone could break if you aren't careful, which is fine. Just be sure to remove any shards so your homie doesn't end up chomping down on the bones. Removing the wishbone makes carving the breasts easier when whole roasting. Alright, so set aside that smaller knife and reach for something like this. Here I'm using a fillet knife. It's sharp, flexible, and the perfect size for breaking down a chicken. If you don't have one of these, just use the sharpest, like mid-sized knife that you have. A chef's knife is totally fine. We'll start by removing the wings. I find it easiest to flip the chicken breast side down and extend the wing fully to get a cleaner gander at the connecting joint. Then slice where the armpit meets the torso. A lot of getting decent at breaking down a chicken is understanding where the bones and the joints meet, so keep that in mind. Onto the legs and thighs. I like to pair these together because we're going to butcher them as one. Then you'll have the decision to keep them attached or separate the leg from the thigh. Slice through the skin of the chicken between the drumstick and the breast, then we need to compound fracture the legs of the chicken. Basically, we need to snap the thigh bone in the opposite way that it naturally bends. If you're squeamish about any of this, put headphones on and drown out the sounds, but, let's be real, you probably wouldn't be watching this video if that was the case. Once fractured, carefully pull off the thigh as you continue to make short, shallow cuts moving up the chicken. The idea here is to preserve what's called the oysters. The oysters are little chunks of dark meat from the back of the chicken. They're tendo, packed with flavor, and arguably the best part of the bird. There are only 2 of them, so try not to let these go to waste. At this point, we can decide if we want to break down a 6-piece bird or an 8-piece. For the 6-piece, keep the legs and the thighs connected. For the 8-piece, separate the 2. That's literally the only difference. Again, it's all about finding the joints here. If you flip the chicken around so it sits skin side down, it's a bit easier to see where things connect. That's a drummer, and that's the thigh guy. Moving right along, all we have left here are the breasticles. Some people cleave right down the center here, leaving the bone in to make what are called split chicken breasts. However, today we're going to slice them clean off and have ourselves some boneless breastises. The breasts are naturally divided by a narrow bone called the keel bone. Starting at the peak of the keel bone, do your best to make short, shallow cuts running down the bird, hugging your knife as close to that keel bone as possible to avoid chunking any of the meat. This is where a flexible knife really comes in handy. With the breasts removed, we're left with the carcass. Don't trash this carcass. We're going to pop it in a freezer bag and save it to make a rich, flavorful chicken stock a little later on. Here are our boneless skin-on breasts. We're going to remove the chicken tender like so. We remove this tender because it cooks at a different rate than the rest of the breast. Again, don't trash these. Prepare them separately, make fried tendos, or just toss them in your stock bag. And you can also clean up your chicken pieces by slicing off any excess skin, fat, cartilage, or any other gunky bits. It's also not a bad idea to wash and sanitize the cutting board you use to butcher. Better yet, if you have the space, designate a cutting board just for chicken. I mean, it's a surefire way to keep things clean and safe. As you could guess, the only way to really get good at breaking down a chicken is to practice. And now that you know how it's done, I want you to get out into the world, go buy yourself a chickie, and get to work. It's really not a bad idea to pick up a few chickens. At the end of the day, you can practice. It's kind of nice going from 1 to 1 to 1, like right then and there, and whatever you don't use, just, cut up and freeze. You'll have a chickie dinner on demand. Thank me later. And yeah, that's all from me, so I shall see y'alls next week. Bye-bye.